The clink of glasses and the soft murmur of conversation surrounded us as Michael and I sat across from each other at our favorite local Italian restaurant. It was our 10th anniversary, a milestone that felt both monumental and like just the beginning of our journey together. To us, Michael said, raising his glass with a smile that still managed to send butterflies fluttering in my stomach. To us, I echoed, the warmth in his eyes making me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. We'd come a long way from those two kids who stumbled into love, and every year felt like a renewal of our vows, a promise to keep walking this path together, no matter what. The conversation flowed effortlessly as we reminisced about the adventures we'd shared, the challenges we'd overcome, and the dreams we still held close. Michael's hand found mine across the table, a silent testament to the bond we shared, unspoken but deeply felt. Let's do something special this weekend, he suggested, his enthusiasm infectious. How about that cabin in the mountains you've been talking about? The idea of escaping our daily grind, if only for a couple of days, was tantalizing. I love it, I said, already picturing us cuddled by the fireplace, surrounded by nothing but nature and the quiet comfort of each other's company. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but the highlight was the family barbecue we hosted. Our backyard was filled with laughter and the delicious aroma of grilling food as we mingled with friends and family. Watching Michael joke around with our diverse group of loved ones, I was struck by how seamlessly he fit into any crowd, his easygoing nature drawing people in. We were that couple, the one others looked to as an example of happiness and compatibility. And I cherished it, every moment, every shared glance that said, we're in this together. As the new school year approached, Michael became my rock, helping me set up my classroom, organizing supplies, and even putting up decorations. His unwavering support was my anchor, reminding me that no matter the challenges, we faced them as a team. It was during these ordinary moments, amid the chaos of preparation and planning, that I found the most profound sense of gratitude for the life we'd built. The surprise birthday party I threw for Michael was a testament to that gratitude. Seeing his face light up with genuine surprise and joy as he walked into the room filled with his closest friends and colleagues was a moment I'd tuck away in my heart forever. It was a night of celebration, of honoring the man who meant the world to me, and of reinforcing the ties that bound us together. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Alex, the new colleague at school, was one of those unexpected twists. He was easy to talk to, with an infectious laugh and a way of making the long hours of work seem a little less daunting. Our lunch breaks together became a regular thing, a chance to step away from the stress of the job and just breathe. It was innocent, or so I told myself, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite name. Then came the school event that would tilt my world on its axis. A brush of hands, an accidental touch that lingered a fraction too long, and suddenly, I was questioning everything. It was a moment of weakness, a crack in the foundation of my marriage, and I stood on the precipice, unsure of which way to fall. The air was charged with a kind of electricity that I hadn't felt in years, not since the early days with Michael. It was supposed to be just another Thursday, another late afternoon of grading papers and planning lessons. But there I was, inventing a project that didn't exist, just so I could see Alex outside of school. It's just work, I lied to myself, ignoring the flutter in my stomach as I sent him the message suggesting we meet up. Lying to Michael felt like stepping into a parallel universe where I wasn't myself. I've got parent-teacher conferences tonight, I told him over breakfast, avoiding his eyes. Might be late. His nod, full of understanding and trust, was a dagger to my conscience. As he kissed me goodbye, whispering, "Love you," I felt the weight of my deceit like a physical burden. The meeting with Alex was a whirlwind. What started as a pretense of discussing work quickly spiraled into personal territory. Over dinner, we shared stories about our lives, our hopes, and the tiny disappointments that we hadn't even acknowledged to ourselves. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, and I found myself laughing more freely than I had in months. The gift came out of nowhere. A small, exquisitely wrapped box slid across the table from Alex's hand to mine. "Just because," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Inside was a delicate necklace, its simplicity striking. The mix of guilt and excitement that coursed through me as I tucked it away in my drawer at home was a cocktail of emotions I hadn't anticipated. It felt like betrayal, yet the thrill was undeniable. Our first kiss wasn't planned. It happened in a secluded spot in the park, a moment suspended in time where all rational thought evaporated. His lips on mine felt like the answer to a question I hadn't dared ask, marking the start of our affair. It was reckless, it was wrong, but in that instant, I didn't care. Communicating through a messaging app became our lifeline, a secret world just for the two of us. Each notification was a heartbeat, a reminder of what I was jeopardizing and yet couldn't seem to stop. The secrecy was intoxicating, but with each message, the web of lies grew thicker. The close call with Michael jolted me back to reality. One evening, as we settled on the couch, a message from Alex lit up my phone. Michael glanced over, curiosity plain on his face. "Just work stuff," I stuttered, snatching the phone away. The look he gave me was one I couldn't quite decipher, and I hated myself for the seeds of doubt I'd planted in his mind. Then came the confrontation with Sarah, my closest friend. "What's going on with you?" she demanded, her concern cutting through my defenses. "You're not yourself." Denying everything was reflexive, a lie that tasted bitter on my tongue. "Nothing's wrong," I insisted, but the guilt in my gut told a different story. Sarah's skeptical look said she didn't believe me, and for the first time, I questioned what I was doing. But by then, the current was too strong, and I was already in too deep. The lies slipped out before I could think twice, dressed up as a necessity for my professional development. "There's a weekend educational conference out of town I really shouldn't miss," I found myself telling Michael, avoiding his gaze. The guilt gnawed at me, but the thrill of a secret rendezvous with Alex clouded my judgment. Michael, ever supportive, just nodded, telling me to go if it was important. The ease with which he trusted me twisted the knife of guilt even deeper. It was during this fabricated conference weekend with Alex that my carefully constructed world started to unravel. We were reckless, caught up in the moment, the danger of our situation only fueling the fire. But every moment spent in Alex's embrace was a moment stolen from Michael, a betrayal of the vows I had once held sacred. Back home, the reality of my actions started to close in on me. Michael found the necklace Alex had given me, a tangible piece of evidence of my betrayal. I stumbled upon him holding it, his confusion palpable. "Found this looking for the spare car keys," he said, his voice heavy with unasked questions. The look in his eyes, a mix of hurt and suspicion, was a wake-up call. I mumbled some half-hearted excuse, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Michael's behavior shifted subtly after that. He began watching me, a silent observer cataloging discrepancies in my stories, piecing together the lies I'd woven so carelessly. I told myself he was just stressed from work, too wrapped up in my own deceit to see the widening gap between us. The confrontation came unexpectedly. I learned from a colleague that Michael had shown up at the school, pulling Alex aside with a stern warning to stay away from me. Alex, confronted later, relayed the encounter with a mix of anger and defiance. "He has no right," Alex insisted, but the fear in his eyes told a different story. Feeling the walls closing in, I realized the magnitude of my mistake. The affair, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a weight dragging me down, threatening to drown everything I held dear. I made the decision then to end it with Alex, to try and salvage the remnants of my marriage, my integrity. The meeting with Alex was tense, charged with the desperation of a love turned sour. "We can't do this anymore," I told him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Alex's reaction was visceral, a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't just end this," he said, his voice low and threatening. But my mind was made up. I walked away from him, from us, carrying the heavy burden of guilt in the faint hope of redemption. Returning home, I braced myself to face Michael, to confront the chasm my actions had created between us. The emotional distance was palpable, a silent barrier erected from lies and betrayal. I clung to the hope that honesty could bridge the gap, that we could rebuild from the wreckage of my decisions. But as I stood in the doorway, watching Michael lost in thought, I couldn't help but wonder if some distances were too vast to cross. The world seemed to stop spinning the moment I heard Michael's key turn in the door earlier than usual. My heart sank, a premonition of disaster settling over me like a dark cloud. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm, as Michael walked in, his face an unreadable mask. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. My stomach twisted into knots, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. It was one of his friends, he explained, who had seen me with Alex. Not just seen, but observed enough to shatter any plausible deniability I might have clung to. The room felt suffocating as he recounted the details, each word a hammer blow to the facade I'd maintained. I tried to deny it, to weave some tale of misunderstanding, but the conviction in his eyes told me it was futile. The truth, heavy and horrifying, spilled from my lips in a torrent of guilt and regret. Michael's reaction was a silent earthquake, devastating in its quiet intensity. "I can't be here," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. Watching him pack a bag was like watching the last 10 years of our life together being dismantled, piece by piece. He left without a backward glance, and with him went the warmth that had once filled our home. The divorce papers arrived not long after, a stark, unfeeling document that put an official end to what had already been shattered. Holding them in my hands, I felt a mix of numbness and acute pain, a dichotomy that mirrored the chaos of my emotions. At school, whispers and sideways glances became my new normal. The affair, once a secret shared in the shadows, was now public domain, fodder for gossip and judgment. My professional reputation, built over years of dedication, crumbled in the wake of my personal failings. Colleagues I'd considered friends now kept their distance, their coldness a mirror to the isolation that enveloped me. I reached out to Michael, desperate for a chance to explain, to apologize, to do anything that might mend the gaping rift between us. But he refused to see me, his silence a clear message that there was nothing left to salvage. That final rejection was a closing door, the last flicker of hope extinguished. The fallout was not just confined to my marriage or my job. Friends we'd shared for years sided with Michael, their loyalty understandable but no less painful. Invitations dried up, social circles closed off, leaving me adrift in a sea of regret and loneliness. The reality of my situation was stark and unforgiving. I had gambled everything on a fleeting temptation and lost more than I could have imagined. The cost of my actions was not just the end of my marriage but the dismantling of the life I had known. Surrounded by the debris of my choices, I was forced to confront the most painful truth of all. In seeking something more, I had ended up with nothing. The days blurred together in a haze of regret and sorrow, each one a stark reminder of the life I dismantled with my own hands. Friends, once a source of comfort, now offered little solace, their support waning as the reality of my actions settled in. I was adrift, caught in a relentless current of my own making, unable to find a foothold in the chaos. The finality of it all hit me like a freight train during the divorce proceedings. There, in that sterile courtroom, I saw Michael for the last time. His face, once so open and warm, was now a mask of indifference. The coldness in his farewell words, "Take care of yourself, Jane," left me shattered, a poignant reminder of the profound love we'd once shared and the irreversible damage I'd caused. The weight of the gossip and judgment at work became unbearable. Each day was a gauntlet, my professional integrity in tatters because of personal failings. Resigning was my only recourse, a bitter pill to swallow. I packed up my classroom, each item a tangible piece of the life I was leaving behind, and walked out the door, feeling the final thread of my old identity sever. The decision to move was born out of desperation, a need to escape the prying eyes and whispered judgments. I chose a new city, one where no one knew my name or my past. The physical distance, I hoped, would offer a semblance of emotional respite. But as I settled into my new surroundings, the ghost of my former life haunted me. The silence of the apartment echoed with memories of Michael, of us. I'd catch glimpses of our life together in the mundane. A couple laughing on the street, the scent of his cologne in a crowd. These specters of the past were constant companions, reminders of what I'd lost. In the quiet of my new life, I was forced to confront the depth of my regret. The solitude offered no distractions from the harsh reality of my choices. I missed Michael, not just the idea of him, but the reality, his laugh, his quirks, the way he'd light up a room. The realization of what I'd thrown away for a fleeting moment of temptation was a bitter truth to swallow. In a moment of desperation, I wrote to Michael. The letter was a raw outpouring of my remorse, a plea for forgiveness, or at least acknowledgement. I poured my heart onto the page, apologizing for the pain I'd caused, expressing my longing for his happiness, regardless of whether I was a part of it. But the silence that met my letter was its own response, a closure of the door I'd hoped might still be ajar. As I faced the reality of my new life, the absence of a reply from Michael underscored the finality of our parting. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time. The journey ahead was mine alone to navigate, a path marked by the consequences of my actions in the hope of finding redemption in the shadow of my mistakes. The news hit me like a punch to the gut, unexpected and brutal in its impact. Through the grapevine of mutual friends, a network I'd thought I'd left behind, I heard about Michael. He had moved on, found someone new. The words were a stark reminder of the life I'd forfeited, a life that was continuing without me. As much as I wanted to be happy for him, the knowledge was a bitter pill, leaving me wrestling with a fresh wave of loss and regret. In this new city, I found solace in the familiar rhythms of teaching. The classroom was a refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the needs of my students, if only for a few hours each day. Yet, each success in this new role was tinged with sadness, a reminder of what I'd left behind. The joy of teaching, once a bright flame, now flickered, overshadowed by the turmoil that clouded my personal life. Loneliness became my constant companion, a byproduct of my decision to start anew. The isolation was palpable, weighing on me with each passing day. Attempts to connect, to build new relationships, felt like navigating a maze blindfolded. The shadow of my past loomed large, a barrier that seemed insurmountable. It was during this time that the full weight of my choices settled around me, a heavy cloak of realization. The consequences of my actions were not just confined to my failed marriage. They rippled outward, altering the course of my life and affecting those I loved. This acknowledgement was a turning point, a moment of painful clarity that marked the beginning of true introspection. Determined to move forward, I threw myself into new activities, trying to forge connections, to build something resembling a life in this new place. Yet, each interaction was colored by the past, my attempts at normalcy constantly undermined by the specter of what had been. An accidental encounter with a former friend drove home my isolation. The cold dismissal I received was a stark contrast to the warmth we once shared. This moment, brief as it was, underscored the reality of my situation, cut adrift from the life I once knew, a stranger even to those who had been close. The stress and emotional strain of the past months began to manifest physically, my health a casualty of the turmoil that churned within. Doctor visits became a new routine, a concession to the toll that guilt and regret had taken on my body. Each appointment was a reminder of the far-reaching consequences of my decisions, the physical embodiment of my emotional pain. In this chapter of my life, every day was a battle, a struggle to find footing in a world that felt increasingly alien. The journey was fraught with setbacks, each one a lesson in the cost of my actions. Yet, within this struggle, there was also growth, a slow, often painful movement towards understanding, acceptance, and, ultimately, the hope of redemption. The morning light streamed in, a stark reminder of the day ahead. My first birthday without Michael. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Last year, a surprise party with friends and laughter. This year, silence and solitude in an apartment still foreign to me. The weight of loneliness pressed down, a physical presence in the too quiet room. Financially, things were tight. The divorce had drained my savings, and setting up a new life in a new city came with costs I hadn't fully anticipated. Each bill, each unexpected expense, was a reminder of the precariousness of my situation. The legal finality of the divorce, marked by the arrival of the official documents, was both a closure and a stark opening into this new, uncertain life. Holding those papers, I felt the last ties to Michael sever, a cold, legal end to what had once been warm and alive. Attempting to move on, I sifted through my belongings, discarding the physical remnants of my life with Michael. Each item was a memory, a moment frozen in time, and letting go was both a release and a fresh wave of grief. It was a necessary purging, an attempt to make space for something new, even as I wondered if new beginnings were truly possible for me. Dating again felt like stepping onto a foreign battlefield, unprepared and vulnerable. My attempts were half-hearted, the connections I made shallow and unfulfilling. The men I met were kind, some interesting, but none could penetrate the shield around my heart. My past haunted me, a ghost that whispered doubts and stirred up memories best left buried. The realization of my loss was profound. It wasn't just Michael the first mourned, but the woman I had been with him, the dreams we'd shared, and the future we'd envisioned. I had lost not only a partner but a part of myself, an identity intertwined with another's. The recognition of this loss was a bitter pill, one that forced me to confront the reality of my choices and their far-reaching consequences. Accepting responsibility for those choices was the hardest step. It would have been easier to blame circumstances, to find excuses in the flaws and failings of others. But standing in my new apartment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my new life, I faced the truth. My actions had led me here. This acknowledgement wasn't a moment of despair but a painful step toward genuine self-reflection and, perhaps, eventual healing. In the quiet of my apartment, I allowed myself a final reflection on the journey that had brought me to this point. The cost of my actions was immeasurable. The pain inflicted on Michael, on myself, and on others, a debt I could never fully repay. The past was immutable, its consequences irrevocable. Yet, in this acknowledgement, there was a kind of freedom, a release from the cycle of denial and avoidance. The path forward was uncertain, the scars of the past still raw and sensitive. Yet, in accepting the full weight of my choices, I found a glimmer of hope. The future was a blank canvas, daunting in its emptiness but also ripe with the possibility of redemption. In the end, the journey of self-discovery, fraught with mistakes and lessons learned, was mine alone